Hi, this is CJ with CompRCC.com, and in this series of videos I'm going to be assembling the 3Racing Sakura Ultimate Touring Car. So the assembly begins with bag number 1, and during this first video, first steps are to assemble the rear differential and the front spool and solid axle. This gets set aside for later. And this is the bag with all of the parts for the front spool, and this is the parts for the rear differential. So we'll start here. And here we have bearings, gaskets, some screws and other hardware, outdrives, number 2000 diff fluid, and all the various plastic parts for the diff, the housing, the gears, etc. So I'm going to start by cutting out all these little plastic parts. I may accelerate the video speed through some of this to make it go a little faster. I'm going to start by taking these bearings and putting a little bit of light oil a little bead around the rim, let it start soaking in while I'm working on these other parts. In a little while I'll flip those over and add a little more oil. And now, to just do a little bit of extra cleanup, I'm going to take a little piece of 600 grit ultrafine sandpaper and just go over the spots, look for any flashing that didn't get completely cut off with the X-Acto knife. Okay, so the first step is to get these outdrives, or the first outdrive, in place. These are very nice. They look and feel like they're made out of aluminum, and they're very, very light. I don't think they're titanium, but they must be aluminum because they're very, very light. And we're supposed to put a little bit of oil on this O-ring. Slide that down on the drive shaft. And since this large washer goes against the plastic, I'm going to put a few little dabs of oil down there. Now, we need to insert one of these little pins. Oops. Into the shaft. even though this is going to be filled with oil. Put just a teeny bit on the back side of this gear. During assembly. And it just drops right down into place. So that's going to get set aside for the moment. And on to the next part. Similar process with the other outdrive. Another O-ring. Just going to nudge that down into place, make sure it's seated. And again, I'm going to take this large flat washer, put a tiny bit of oil on it. This looks a little tricky. I have to insert another pin in the directions they recommend using a pair of tweezers, but I think a small needle nose plier will do the job. And it's centered, actually went in quite easily. So if you can see, that's what it looks like. And that's assembled. As with the other one, even though all of these parts are going to be sitting in a bit of a bath of fluid, I want to make sure that all the parts that run against each other, slippery little sucker, are going to be covered. Make sure I didn't get any dirt or dust on there. Looks good. Okay. Drop that in, and then just rotate it with the tip of your finger until it drops onto the pin, and then that part's finished. Okay. Now, according to the directions, this gets filled with oil to the top of this gear, so just submerging it. This is fairly thick, so to make sure you actually have it full, you need to put a little drop down the slots where this little star piece goes with the 4 gears to make sure you've actually got this full. It also helps to let it sit for a second and let the fluid run and level out. Okay, so now these 4 washers and these 4 little gears come into play. And again, I'm just going to put a teeny bit of oil on the inside. Run that around so I know there's oil on there. And go ahead and put a little bit on each one of these shafts. And this may be overkill as far as making sure everything is lubricated, because all of this stuff is going to be spinning around in that oil. But just to be sure, when this thing gets going for the first time, I want to make sure everything is well coated. At this point, my fingertips have enough oil on them that I really don't need to do too much extra. Just rub the washer between my fingertips and okay, there's all 4 washers, all 4 spacers, and the 4 gears. Everything's looped up. And this just gets dropped in and let the gears mesh right on in. And you can actually, if you look, you can turn this and gears all roll and mesh. Okay, now the directions again call for adding oil to this, and to make sure that it's in here evenly, go ahead and put it through all these parts, roll the gear a little bit, let that oil get churned down in between the teeth of the gears. And that looks like we've got about the right level. The gears are not completely submerged, just so it covers the top of that little star. And we put our gasket into place. Put the top of the spool. I think what I'm going to do is put the gasket inside this spool first. There's some little tabs in here that help orient it properly. These little screws are 1.5 millimeter. So since they don't drop right through the gasket, I'm going to go ahead and thread them through the gasket gently. I don't want to force them through and damage the gasket material. This is one of those areas of the car that you want to take as much time as possible And make sure you do everything very carefully. Make sure everything is properly aligned. I'm not sure if you can see, but inside here are 4 little tabs, and that orients the gasket along with the screws. So if the gasket wasn't down on this surface snugly and it got pinched in between, if it got pinched in between one of those little tabs there, the gasket wouldn't seal properly, probably leak, the differential wouldn't work properly because the gears wouldn't be properly aligned and might even wreck the gears. So now I'm going to get each of these in place and slowly start tightening them down in a star pattern. Sure to keep this pointed straight up so that none of the diff fluid runs out. Now as this is starting to go together, just making sure that the gears aren't binding up as I'm tightening it down. Keep turning it a little bit as I'm getting closer and closer to bring this all the way down. Okay, I can feel that the gears are just starting to make contact with each other now. Okay, and the gears are meshing now. The bottom outdrive is starting to turn. Okay, gears are meshing. Keep testing it. And everything's coming together nicely. And as you can see, you turn one side, the other side counter rotates. Everything feels nice and smooth. It's definitely a little stiff, but it hasn't been run in yet, and there's a lot of fluid in there, so I think we've got a good diff action going. Okay. No fluid leaking out. Diff is assembled.